good morning, and welcome back to the story. I think today might be the thrilling conclusion of Freedom's Paradox. We shall just have to see how far I get in the time that I have here this morning. So we left Jesus and the main character, excuse me, they were in this cabin. They were looking at things on a projector microscope, different aspects of guilt and shame that came out of the character's heart. They'd already looked at 4 of these things, and they were getting ready to look at the 5th one, and they made some pretty important discoveries along the way. So let's pick up where we left off here. So they talk about this thing where the character made a mistake. She spilled coffee, but it's not really a sin, right? But in her mind, she was treating it that way, and Jesus helped her to see that mistakes are just mistakes. Let's see. I'm talking about law, breaking the law. Okay. And false guilt, which is actually shame, and doesn't actually condemn you of anything because you didn't do anything wrong. But we still struggle with how we think about that, doesn't it? Okay, let's see here. Sorry, I thought this was still at my place. Well, let's talk about false guilt here. I think this is where we left off. Okay, Jesus touched my arm. Okay, so they're looking at her guilt and shame in like these 4 petri dishes. And so here's the last one. Jesus touched my arm, his eyes full of compassion. Let's look at our last dish. This one seems to be filled with a liquid that shifted consistency and hue every few seconds. He placed it in the microscope. I took a deep breath, then turned my attention to the projection. This scenario showed my balance scale once more. However, this time the bad side was filled with colored papers of various hues and sizes. Next to the scale sat an enormous book, a veritable tome. It seemed to be broken up into sections, delineated by different colored pages. Laws was emblazoned on the front. What in the world are these? I asked, pointing to the papers on my scale's full bad side. That's false guilt. I wrinkled my eyebrow. Come again? False guilt from failing to follow someone else's law or from stealing someone else's guilt. I stared at him, unenlightened. Think about the Pharisees, he said. I know you've heard some of what your pastor said about them. They thought they were extra good because they went above and beyond the Mosaic law. He nodded. You see that particularly in their regulations about the Sabbath. They had numerous rules about what constituted a burden or work. I raised an eyebrow. Such as whether you put something in a beggar's hand or whether you held out your hand for the beggar to take the thing. Or whether you inadvertently carried a needle in your clothing. His eyes flashed. By elevating their own perceptions of how things ought to be, they created a system of laws that made a heavy load for people to bear. They put those laws into the same category as our law. People can twist parts of the truth into a power play. This is why you fear truth and why you see it as a constraint, rather than something that sets you free. Sadly, in your experience, it was often used like a club to bludgeon you into submission. I walked over to the image and studied it. I pictured those papers turning into the links of a chain. Jesus joined me. Or such as you elevating the coffee spill into equality with our law, he added. I turned to him. It could have been a sin if I had maliciously put it in her way, right? Yes, but were you? No. And by taking all the responsibility for the spill on yourself, did you do her any favors? Well, it might have helped her saved face. He waved that aside. Did she learn anything, such as to pay attention to where she was gesturing? I stared at him. No, I guess not. Right. You short-circuited other... Sorry, I thought the microphone might not be plugged in. You short-circuit other people's growth when you take their guilt upon yourself. As we've discussed, this was an accident. No malicious intent on either side. I took a deep breath, feeling suddenly freer. See, true conviction has a purpose, but it's getting lost in all these lies. Conviction keeps you from being imprisoned by your sin, by forcing you to come to us for salvation. It also lets you know when you're on the wrong side of our law and liable to smash into consequences. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye and smirked. Yet another freedom-enhancing restriction. I chuckled. But what about other situations, like the coffee spill? How can I tell when I'm following your law and when I'm hanging on to something else? Our law is an extension of our character. No arbitrary rules. They're all anchored in who we are, which never changes. You have our word, he said, and gestured to my Bible. Use it. Learn our law and come to know us better. Walk with me and I'll walk with you. You'll walk with me, I said. Somehow my concept of religion consisted of an occasional check-in to verify compliance. Unless I did something truly heinous, I'd be left alone. Jesus took a step closer. Forever, he said. We're talking about a relationship, not merely a system of rules. My eyes flickered towards the full scale with its tome, then back to Jesus. I think I get it. That's why it matters what you follow and how you follow it. How I follow? Remember the Pharisees? They were supposedly following our law. They had just gotten so focused on the externals, on the actions involved, that they ripped the heart out of our law. Our law is designed to be used in the context of a relationship with us. You can't divorce it from love. On the other hand, we're not talking about infatuation. You can't follow our law out of pure passion for us. That will fade and dissipate in the shifting winds of circumstance. I slowly walked back to my chair. I sat down and stared into the crackling fire. A log fell and sent sparks flying up the chimney. How and what had I been following? Not Jesus. He was so much more like the God I knew. I chewed my lip. So some of the time I'd been like the Pharisees, following a what? A set of regulations? But what about my love for God? Switch the labels. I guessed deep down I'd wanted what I could get from God, and that information had blinded me to the more He is and the more I could have with Him. Perhaps it had been glimmers of Him I'd been chasing all along. Jesus sat back down. I think I'm starting to understand, I murmured. Odd that God would take time to demolish my false preconceptions of Himself. A love relationship, not rules or infatuation alone. He gave me a broad smile and covered my hand with his. Exactly. Love requires both knowledge and passion. Knowledge alone is anti-relational. Love that's not anchored in knowledge turns out to be infatuation. But put knowledge and passion together, and you begin something amazing. The more you come to know us through our word, the more your capacity for love increases. Those feelings of passion then prompt the quest for more relational knowledge, and on and on. He stood up, then gestured towards the door. Now let's look at one more thing. I raised my eyebrow and followed him out the door. We had returned to my car. The concrete barrier stretched out into the distance. Why do you think they bother you so much? He asked once more, indicating the barrier. The answer came in a flash. Because they represent rules apart from a relationship, I said excitedly. He beamed at me. Yes. To you, concrete barriers are the epitome of faceless rules. You've been so terrified of being turned into a robot and losing your freedom that you've avoided rules. He put both hands on my shoulders and looked me in the eye. But, darling, if you are a fish, jumping out of the water in protest is not a productive way to assert your freedom. I smiled. Right. Freedom is not the absence of restrictions. It's the presence of the right ones, he finished, pointing to himself. So, what do you think? Do you want to walk along with us, along our law? Or would you rather keep smashing into it? He asked, and quirked a smile at me. I thought for a moment, though the answer seemed obvious. Part of me still longed to control my own destiny. Then I remembered myself, a poor, gasping fish out of water. When had I ever controlled my own destiny? I was afraid someone would take advantage of me, but Jesus had proven his love. He already restricted his freedom for me. Was I willing to do the same? And then I realized I'd been hooked from the beginning of this crazy dream. Jesus himself had drawn me, and I never wanted to leave him. I turned to him, then smiled and put my hand in his. I'll walk with you, wherever that may be. Journal 11:16. Today marks 4 months since I saw Jesus. My business is going well. That's not to say it's making more profit. However, I'm handling all those regulations better. I even joined a small business advocacy group to work towards changing the rules and simplifying the red tape. In fact, as I've been learning about the rules, some of them are actually freedom-enhancing restrictions. I wonder if I'll always categorize things in terms of freedom. Anyway, I think I'm finally beginning to grasp the freedom found in confession and following God's law. It's so strange. I spent my whole life in bondage to rules, either through rebellion or guilt. Yet now that I'm starting to embrace God's law, I'm finding more and more freedom, not to mention more happiness. It's so paradoxical. Church has been going better too. I've started trying to live out some of these concepts there, and I've gotten involved in a group of like-minded folks. Being in relationship with them has really helped me. I figured I needed that kind of openness to make sure shame stays in check. I haven't had that crazy car nightmare anymore. In fact, seeing concrete barriers has become sort of relaxing, like having someone you love share an inside joke or a smile across a crowded room. They're a tangible reminder of this adventure I'm on with God. I found this verse this morning in my time with God. I hope I never forget it. In some ways, it's already engraved on my soul. I will walk about in freedom, for I have sought your precepts. Psalm 119:45. The end. The next story is The Abyss. I wanted to just talk about this book a little bit. You may have noticed that I've been reading it, that there's these footnotes here. Liz, just her being her amazing self. So these are fiction stories, but they're full of references and sources and footnotes here, like a scholarly, an article or something for peer review. I mean, look at this. So if you're reading this book and you're wondering where the idea came from, it's right here. Most of these are Bible verses. Some of them are quotes from other people. I know there's like Tim Keller in here and C.S. Lewis and things like that. So this is an amazing resource, and the link to buy the book is in the description. It's called Tales from a Spacious Place by Elizabeth Frerichs. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I thank you for listening and watching the replay of the live stream. I enjoyed trying to learn how to use this particular aspect of YouTube. So thanks for that, and I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. God bless.